I'd like to read a statement. Sorry. It's teeing up the ball for y'all's first debate. I want to read a statement. I'd like for y'all to comment on it. And then also, it's kind of two-part. I would like for y'all to give your go-to golden standard verse for limited atonement. If you could only pick one to argue from, which one would that be? So here's the statement. When the atonement is universally applied to all men, the conclusion is that it makes salvation objectively possible for all, but it does not in itself actually save anyone.
I'll be super brief. So I hear a lot of people say, you can't show me one verse.
You don't look like Leighton Flowers.
Keith, do you know who Leighton is?
Do you know who Leighton Flowers is? You don't know who Leighton Flowers is? Okay, all right. He's the king of the provisionists. So I've debated him twice, and that's something I will never ever do again.
You've said that people need to punch you.
No, I specifically said I was walking after the last debate in Houston last year on John 6. As I was walking to where I was going to be greeting people, I have this friend, Rudy Jabouri, who is walking with me. He's Assyrian, and I said, Rudy, if you ever hear me even whisper that I'm thinking about debating Leighton Flowers again, I want you to punch me in the face. And he said, okay, I will. And that's why I was saying you don't look like Leighton Flowers, but that's something that he would say.
Yeah. My go-to verse would be, so for one, a lot of times these conversations will be, you can't show me one verse where Jesus said he loves only the elect, or that he died just for the elect, right? And so in Romans 8, you got the golden chain of redemption, how God is guaranteeing glorification for those whom he called. And then he goes on into saying that he has a unique love for the elect, that he died for them. Not only that, but he was raised and he intercedes on their behalf. So Romans 8 for me is kind of a go-to, but I want to give one more verse in preparation for the debate. I've really thought, man, this is so rich. In Ephesians 5:25, husbands, love your wives. And then the Greek word here is kathos, in the same way, or just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So what you're going to be seeing in the cross-examination Friday is I'm going to ask the question, are husbands allowed to share in their one flesh union of love with their spouse with someone else? Okay, because everyone's going to say, well, no, that's crazy, right? If you believe in monogamy the way that the whole context talks for. Well, that's in verse 28, in the same way that Christ gave himself up for the bride. So is he able to share in that love union with someone else who is not the bride? Well, now you're in a hard spot because you're going to undo the analogy if Christ can show this special love for someone who's not the bride, right? So that's the standard of what gives the foundation for marriage.
Yeah, Romans 8, who shall bring a charge against God's elect? Christ, the one who died, yea, was rather raised from the dead, and the right hand of the Father who intercedes for us. And if you follow the pronouns through the golden chain into the law court example there in Romans 8, it's very, very clear. There's a what's the guy who used to be at Southwestern?
David Allen?
Yes, thank you. David Allen has written, I don't know, I think he's up to 3 books now on the same topic, and articles and stuff like that. And he's tried to deal with Romans 8 and just failed horribly because you can't get around it. So that certainly is key for me. And since he already mentioned that, then Hebrews 7, 8, and 9 would be where I would go next, especially where you make the connection between the act of self-giving, the sacrifice on the part of the high priest, and then his intercessory work. And so and this is not, and unfortunately, this isn't something that most even Reformed believers think a whole lot about, but the fact of the matter is, it's the relationship of the offering and the intercession The high priest had to do both things. He made the sacrifice, and then he had to take that blood into the holy place and sprinkle it on the mercy seat. Neither one is sufficient in and of itself. It's one act of the high priest. If Jesus is our high priest, then that then becomes the background of the beauty of Revelation chapter 5. The Lamb standing as if slain. Here he is in the presence of the Father, and he still has the blood marked upon him. He is the living sacrifice. And that's very specific as to who that's for. He, by his blood, he has made us a kingdom of priests. So you can go to Revelation 5, you can go to Hebrews 7, 8, 9, you can do Romans chapter 8, and we'll be doing that tomorrow night, next night, Friday night. Whatever night it is, I'll show up. I'll be there, don't worry. But one thing that I think will come out is that our opponents don't have a concept of particular election, so you can't have a foundation for particular redemption. And this is a good illustration of the power of a thoroughly biblical theology is its consistency all the way across. So years ago, I went to St. Louis. In fact, since that time, I've gone to the same little church in St. Charles, Missouri. And in fact, good friend of mine is going to be flying down from St. Charles for the debates, and I want to make sure he's got a good seat and stuff. He's a good guy. But this next year, this December, first weekend in December when I go there, will be the 25th year that I've spoken at this church at that time of the year. I've told them that's it. They need to find someone younger, smarter, prettier, all the rest of that kind of stuff. I'm not sure they're buying that, but anyway. But when I first went, there was a guy who's written some books against Calvinism, and pretty aggressive fellow. And we were going to do a debate on a local radio station, and he wanted to debate whether you could lose your salvation. And I'm like, well, okay. And so he writes up this contract. I start getting nervous when somebody does that. Writes up this contract. And as part of the contract, he said, I could not mention any of the other 4 points of Calvinism in any of my comments. And I'm like, what? Because obviously, he's going to be mentioning the other 4 points of Arminianism in his. He just doesn't view it that way. But I'm like, no, that's absurd. Especially that point, the perseverance of the saints, is the end result of everything that came before it. And in the same way, particular redemption, there's very specific and important biblical truths that have to be established to have a truly biblical understanding of what was accomplished at the cross of Calvary. So you can't just go to a particular verse. There are certain verses I think you cannot possibly get around. But the full defense involves more than that.
I like how you quoted a little bit of the King James there from Romans 8. Very nice.